Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to be honest with you, usually when I pick up a stack of research papers, I know roughly what I'm getting into.
Sure.
If it's economics, I expect charts. If it's history, I expect dates. But today I feel like I walked into a physics class that turned into a mythology seminar.
That is actually a surprisingly accurate description of the topic.
We are talking about New Zealand, but not the New Zealand you see on Instagram.
Yeah.
We aren't here to talk about hobbit holes or rugby scores or millions of sheep.
No, we're going a bit deeper than that.
We are looking at a country that, according to the geological reports from GNS Science in front of me, arguably shouldn't even exist.
In a geological sense, it is a bit of an anomaly, yes.
It's a land that is 95% underwater. It's a place where the mountains are moving horizontally faster than your fingernails grow.
It really is.
And it's a nation where the history involves, well, maybe the most daring migration in human existence.
It's right up there.
So our mission is to peel back that postcard image and look at the engine underneath. We're going to look at the hidden continent, the violent tectonics, and the incredible human story of survival.
It's a puzzle. And you really can't separate the geology from the mythology. They are locked together.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the statistic that completely threw me. You mentioned it in the notes. New Zealand is just the tip of the iceberg.
Or the tip of the continent.
Literally.
Literally. If you were to drain the Pacific Ocean, you wouldn't see two narrow islands. You would see a massive, sprawling continent. We call it Zealandia, or technically Tasmantis.
And how big are we talking?
It's roughly the size of India.
Wow.
Or, about half the size of Australia. It is huge. But today, 95% of it is submerged.
So New Zealand is just the penthouse suite.
The top 5% that manages to poke above the waves.
That's it.
Exactly.
So was this an Atlantis situation? Did it sink in some kind of cataclysm?
It's slower than Atlantis, but the physics are fascinating. Go back about 83 million years. Zealandia was part of the supercontinent Gondwanaland.
Okay.
It was nestled right up against Australia and Antarctica. Then it started to rift away.
It broke up with the supercontinent.
It did. But unlike other continents that break off as these thick chunks, the crust of Zealandia was stretched. Imagine taking a ball of pizza dough and pulling it from both sides.
Right, it gets thinner in the middle.
Exactly. And in geophysics, thin crust is less buoyant. It sits lower in the Earth's mantle. So for about 100 million years, this massive continent was stretched, thinned, and it slowly sank.
So for a while, New Zealand just wasn't there.
It was likely just a patch of open ocean. By the Miocene era, about 23 million years ago, it's very likely the entire continent was underwater.
Drowned.
Maybe a few small rocky outcrops, but effectively, yes, the land had drowned.
So what brought it back? Why are we able to book flights to Auckland today?
Violence, specifically a collision. Around 23 million years ago, the movement of the tectonic plates changed. The Pacific plate and the Australian plate started smashing into each other. And that collision forced the submerged, thinned crust to buckle and thrust upwards.
So the country is basically the wreckage of a car crash between two tectonic plates.
That is a perfect analogy. Without that tectonic smash-up, there would likely be no land there today. It was resurrected by the fault lines.
That sets the stage perfectly. You have this unstable, thrust-up landmass. It's isolated. It's rugged.
Right.
And then, much, much later, humans arrive. And looking at the migration data you shared, this wasn't an accident. This wasn't people drifting on a log.
No, and that's a common misconception. The settlement of New Zealand is the endpoint of the greatest expansion in human history.
The greatest.
You can trace the genetics and the linguistics. It starts in Taiwan about 5,200 years ago.
That far back.
Yes. These ancestors moved through the Philippines, skirted past Melanesia, and then pushed out into the vastness of the Pacific Polynesia. They developed ocean-going technology that was thousands of years ahead of the rest of the world.
It's the ultimate road trip, but the road is moving, and there are no gas stations.
And New Zealand was the final stop. It was the last major landmass on Earth to be settled by humans.
So when are we talking exactly?
The scientific consensus now, based on radiocarbon dating of seeds and rat bones, places the arrival between 1280 and 1350 AD.
That is incredibly recent. I mean, think about that context. By 1280, the Crusades are winding down.
Right.
Europe is building massive cathedrals. The Magna Carta is already history. And meanwhile, this massive country down south, is completely empty of humans.
It's a blink of an eye in geological terms. They arrived shortly after a massive eruption of Mount Aotearoa, which must have been terrifying.
Well, I can't even imagine.
And the genetic data is what really blows my mind. Mitochondrial DNA studies suggest the founding population was tiny.
How tiny?
We're talking about a founding population of perhaps 50 to 100 women.
50 to 100. That is a razor-thin margin for error. If 2 or 3 of those Waka the canoes had capsized in a storm, the entire history of the country doesn't happen.
Precisely. They came from Hawaii, which researchers believe is likely Raletea in French Polynesia, and they had to transplant an entire civilization.
And not just people, right?
No, they brought crops like kumara or sweet potato, which is a tropical plant. They had to make it grow in a much colder, temperate climate.
And they gave the place a name. Or rather, names. This is where the notes get into the Aotearoa versus New Zealand discussion.
Right. Aotearoa is the one most people know. It is usually translated as the land of the long white cloud.
Which sounds very poetic, like something from a fantasy novel.
Yeah.
But the notes suggest it was actually a practical observation.
Yes. The origin story involves the explorer Kupe. Legend says his wife, Kuromaratini, was the one watching the horizon.
Okay.
She saw a long, stationary cloud hanging low over the water. She called out, "He-ao, he-ao, he-ao," meaning a cloud, a cloud.
Because a stationary cloud usually means there's land underneath it, disrupting the airflow.
Exactly. It was a navigational beacon. She spotted the sign of land before they saw the land itself.
That's amazing.
But here's where we need to be accurate. Originally, Aotearoa referred specifically to the North Island.
Oh, just the Norse Island.
Using it to cover the whole country is a more modern custom.
And New Zealand is a European import.
It is. Abel Tasman, the Dutch explorer, was the first European to sight the country in 1642. His cartographers back in the Netherlands named it New Zealand after the province of Zeeland.
Which translates to
Yeah.
sea land.
So we have long white cloud and sea land. Honestly, for a group of islands in the middle of the roaring 40s, both of those are pretty accurate descriptions.
They are. But the name is just the label. The real story is what happened after those first Polynesian voyagers landed.
Right.
Because I think many people have this static idea of traditional Maori life. But the archaeology paints a picture of 2 completely different societies separated by time. This was the aha moment for me in the history section. You can't just lump it all together. You have the Archaic period and the Classic period.
Right.
And the difference between them is basically lunch.
In a way, yes. It comes down to resources.
Right.
The Archaic period, roughly 1280 to 1500, is often called the Moa hunter phase.
Okay, tell me about the moa. Because these weren't chickens.
Far from it. These were giant flightless birds. The largest species stood up to 3 meters tall and weighed 250 kilograms.
That is a dinosaur.
Essentially. And because New Zealand had been isolated for 80 million years, there were no land mammals.
So they had no predators.
The moa had no natural predators except the Haast's eagle. They'd never seen a human. You could essentially walk right up to them.
So for those first settlers, it was a buffet.
It was a time of immense abundance. The settlements were coastal. And interestingly, looking at the archaeological layers, there is a distinct lack of weapons or fortifications.
They didn't need to fight.
They didn't need to fight over territory because there was plenty of protein to go around.
But that's not sustainable.
No. It's a classic case of rapid resource depletion. The moa were slow breeders. Humans hunted them, ate their eggs, and burned the forests they lived in.
Oh boy.
Within a few centuries, the moa were extinct. The Haast's eagle died out because its food source was gone. The New Zealand swan gone.
And this forces the shift to the Classic period. The party is over.
Exactly. Around 1500, the resource base collapses. At the same time, the climate cools down due to the Little Ice Age. Life gets hard.
And this is when the warrior culture emerges.
Yes, this is when the patat appear, the fortified hill forts with palisades and trenches. You see the development of specialized weapons made from punamu, or greenstone. You see the rise of complex tribal boundaries and ritualized warfare. The famous haka, the facial moko tattoos. Much of this crystallizes during this period of adaptation to scarcity.
It's fascinating. The culture wasn't just how they were. It was a direct response to the environment changing.
And we have a control group to prove it, the Moriori.
Right, the group that left.
About the 15th century, a group of Maori migrated from the mainland to the Chatham Islands about 800 kilometers east.
The Chathams are different.
Very. They're cold, small, and isolated. The resources there couldn't support large-scale warfare. If they fought, they would have wiped each other out.
So what did they do?
They developed the law of Nunuku, It was a strict code of pacifism.
And pacifism.
Yes. If a conflict arose, it was settled ritually, and as soon as the first blood was drawn, the fight was over. Same ancestors, same genetics as the mainland Maori, but a completely different environment led to a diametrically opposite society.
That is a stunning A/B test of human nature.
Yeah.
Now, I want to bridge this into the mythology, because usually we treat myths as just stories. But reading through these notes, the Maori legends about the land seem to be surprisingly accurate geological observations.
We call this geomythology. It's where oral tradition encodes geological memory. The ancestors were observing the land closely, and they encoded that data into stories.
Take the North Island. The legend is that the demigod Maui fished it up.
Ti'ika a Maui, the fish of Maui. He hauled it up from the deep using a magic jawbone hook. But the crucial detail is the aftermath.
Right, his brothers got involved.
The legend says that after he caught the fish, he left to give thanks. While he was gone, his brothers got greedy. They started hacking at the fish with their weapons to carve out their shares.
And the fish thrashed around in pain.
Exactly. The chopping and the thrashing created the mountains, the valleys, and the jagged coastline.
And geologically.
Look at the North Island. It's incredibly active volcanoes, rapid uplift, fault lines everywhere. The myth perfectly captures the violent, rugged nature of that terrain. It explains why the land looks chopped up.
And then you have the South Island, which in legend is the canoe.
Te Waka a Maui. The canoe Maui stood on to catch the fish, and the Southern Alps. The legend says a different ancestor, Aotearoa, and his brothers were in a canoe that got stranded on a reef.
Okay.
They climbed onto the high side to avoid drowning, and the cold wind froze them into stone.
Aotearoa became Mount Cook, the highest peak.
Frozen into stone. That image implies a transformation from something moving to something solid and rising. And geologically, that is the Alpine Fault at work.
What do you mean?
The Southern Alps have been uplifted about 20 kilometers in the last 12 million years.
Wait, hold on. 20 kilometers. Mount Cook is less than 4,000 meters high. That's only 4 kilometers. Where did the other 16 kilometers go?
Erosion. The weather in the South Island is brutal. As fast as the tectonic plates push the mountains up, the rain, ice, and wind grind them down.
It's a dynamic equilibrium.
It is. If the erosion stopped, those mountains would rival the Himalayas.
That is wild. It's like a conveyor belt of rock constantly rising and being shaved off.
It is. And speaking of shaving rock, look at Fjordland. The legend says the demigod Tute Rakiwanua carved those massive fjords with an adze.
Which makes sense visually. Milford Sound looks like it was sliced by a giant axe.
It does. But my favorite detail in the Fjordland myth is the pest control.
The sandflies.
Yes. If you have ever been to the West Coast, you know about the sandflies. The legend says the goddess Hinyatapa released them because the place was too beautiful.
Too beautiful.
She was worried that if humans saw Milford Sound, they would just stand there staring at the view forever. They would forget to hunt or eat. So she created the sandflies to force them to keep moving.
Listen, anyone who's tried to take a selfie in Milford Sound knows that goddess was successful. You take the photo, and you run back to the bus.
It's a practical explanation for a very annoying reality. But underneath all this beauty, the geology is ticking.
Right. We mentioned the collision of plates earlier. That brings us to the modern reality of the Shaky Isles.
And the Alpine Fault.
This thing runs 600 kilometers up the spine of the South Island, and the stats in these reports are terrifying.
It is one of the world's most significant geological features. We know it moves horizontally about 30 meters every 1,000 years.
That sounds slow.
In geological terms, that is hypersonic. Most faults move a few millimeters. But the scary part is that it doesn't glide. It locks.
It gets stuck.
Friction holds the two plates together, the pressure builds up for centuries, and then it snaps.
What kind of snap?
We have a record of magnitude 8.0 earthquakes happening roughly every 200 to 400 years. The last big rupture was in 1717 AD.
I'm doing the math here. 1717 plus 300 years. You're past the 300 mark.
We are deep in the statistical danger zone. The probability of a rupture in the next 50 years is considered high.
Wow.
And when it goes, it's going to reshape the entire South Island.
Yeah.
But the scary thing isn't always the fault you know, it's the one you don't.
You're talking about Christchurch.
The Canterbury earthquakes in 2010 and 2011. Christchurch wasn't considered a high-risk zone compared to somewhere like Wellington. But in 2010, the Darfield quake happened on a blind fault.
A blind fault.
The Greendale Fault. It was buried under the gravel of the Canterbury Plains. It had no surface expression. Nobody knew it was there until it ripped across the farmland.
And then the 2011 quake followed. It was smaller in magnitude, but it was so much more deadly.
It was a sniper shot. It was shallow, and it was right under the city center. The ground acceleration was recorded at 2.2 g.
Explain that for the non-physicists. What does 2.2 g mean?
It means the ground moved upwards and sideways faster than gravity could pull things down. If you were standing there, you were essentially thrown into the air.
Oh my God.
The violence was such that the solid earth turned into a liquefaction. Cars sank into the road. Buildings collapsed. It killed 185 people and cost the economy up to $20 billion.
It shattered the illusion of stability. It reminded everyone that the land is still being built.
And that brings us to the final layer of our puzzle, the collision of cultures.
Right.
Because just like the plates crashing together, the arrival of Europeans caused massive upheavals.
We mentioned the early explorers, Cook and Tasman. But the real impact comes later. The sealers, the whalers, and the muskets.
The musket wars are a tragic and often overlooked period. Between 1805 and 1843, European traders introduced firearms.
And this changed the balance of power.
Completely. You had these traditional tribal rivalries that had been balanced for centuries using hand weapons. Suddenly, one side has muskets.
It's an arms race.
A deadly one. The notes estimate over 20,000 deaths. But beyond the death toll, there was massive displacement. Entire tribes, or iwi, fled their ancestral lands to escape enemies with guns.
So the map was redrawn.
The map of Maori, New Zealand was completely redrawn before the British government even officially took over.
And that chaos partly led to the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840.
It did. It was an attempt to establish British sovereignty while guaranteeing Maori property rights and tribal autonomy.
An attempt?
Of course, the translation differences and the interpretation of that document have been the source of conflict, protest, and legal battles for over 180 years.
And that debate over identity isn't history. It's happening right now. We started the show talking about the name Aotearoa. There's a real political movement to make that the official name.
There is. Te Pāti Maori, the Maori Party, launched a petition that gathered 70,000 signatures to change the name officially to Aotearoa.
But looking at the polling data in the source tag, the public opinion is pretty split, right?
It is complex. Polls from 2021 and 2023 show that about half, maybe up to 58%, want to keep New Zealand.
Okay.
Only about 9% want just Aotearoa. But a significant chunk, around 30 to 36%, prefer the dual name, Aotearoa, New Zealand.
You see that dual usage everywhere now. Government agencies, the news, corporate branding. It feels like a natural evolution.
It reflects the bicultural foundation. Proponents argue it recognizes the indigenous heritage. Opponents worry about the branding costs or simply prefer the history attached to New Zealand.
But it shows that the identity of the country, just like the geology, is not static.
It's shifting.
So if we step back and look at the whole picture, the sunken continent, the voyagers who navigated the impossible, the extinction of the moa, the quakes, the treaty, what is the headline here?
For me, New Zealand is a laboratory of high-stakes adaptation.
How so?
Look at the pattern. The land itself is adapting to a massive tectonic collision. The wildlife adapted to isolation by becoming giants. The Maori adapted to a colder climate and the loss of the moa by completely restructuring their society into a warrior culture. Then they had to adapt again to European colonization and technology.
And the modern nation is adapting to the reality of living on a fault line.
Exactly. It is a place of duality. You have the calm beauty, the frozen tears of the glacier, the long white cloud, but underneath, the alpine fault is locked.
And that is the final thought I want to leave everyone with. The sources are clear. The alpine fault is overdue. The clock is ticking. The history of this land is defined by how life adapts to sudden, violent change. The pressure is building underground right now. So the question isn't if the land will change again, but how the next chapter of human adaptation will unfold when the Earth decides to move.
That is the question living on the edge of the plate boundary poses every single day.
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll catch you on the next one.